While our guests are joining us, I'd just like to comment that we have a beautiful Viking ship on the screen. In my former hometown in Toronto, you can see the terminal building with the green roof and the CN Tower behind it. And I think the photograph was taken from the Toronto Islands, which are islands in the bay. Um, just a beautiful waterfront and magnificent ship.
Yeah, we have people still strolling in.
I think we have quite a few guests joining us this morning, if I'm not mistaken, Joe.
Yeah, that's right. We have a growing number of guests joining us for each of these webinars, which is great to see.
Wonderful. I'm broadcasting from Kingston, Ontario, which is on the St. Lawrence River at the point where it joins the Thousand Islands, and it was very cool this morning. Had a little frost on my lavender plants, and we'll be covering them up tonight. And Susan is
Wow.
broadcasting from Ottawa, and Joe, you're in Boston, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. As our guests will see later, we'll be highlighting one of the itineraries that is focused on highlighting fall foliage in this area. And as I was outside earlier this morning walking through my neighborhood, it's unbelievable. I just actually bought a digital camera. I want to a little bit start getting into photography, and I'm excited this weekend to spend some time just
That's
finding
exciting.
great shots. Yeah, just exploring. Yeah, it's exciting. We'll give people another 30 seconds or another minute.
My
Um,
my my
Connect.
son just bought a 360-degree digital camera,
Oh
which
wow.
it's quite something. You can program it to record simultaneously through 360 degrees, and then when you play it back, you can order it to just play one quadrant of the 360 degrees, and you can mix that together in a wonderful show.
Is that the one that's like on it's on like a stick connected? They
Yeah,
hold it
it
on a
is.
stick, but it like
Yeah, you can put
yeah.
it on a motorbike or your bicycle, and then when you're riding, you can be showing what you're seeing ahead, and you can also have the camera recording yourself, so that you can have a small box in the corner of the photograph, the
Mhm.
corner of the screen.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I
Super.
think so. I think so. But
All right, well,
this is a particularly nice photograph of the Viking ship in Toronto, though. Beautiful
yeah,
reflections here.
Viking Polaris. Great. Well, with that, we can get started. Good morning, everyone, actually. At least where I am, it's 11 a.m. in Boston. Thank you for joining us here on this Friday morning. My name is Joe Casey. I am a manager here at Great Lakes Cruises. We're delighted to have you join us today. We'll be highlighting the destinations and ships and itineraries, all focused on Lakes Ontario and Lake Erie. Um, and as kind of you've mentioned, or we've heard earlier in this little welcome, that located in the Boston area, and I'm excited because on Monday, one of the cruise ships of Hapag-Lloyd will be docked in Boston here, and I'll have the chance to go and do a ship inspection, meet some of the crew, and so that's something for me that is always a delight. So I'd like to introduce alongside me Stephen Burnett. He is the executive director of the Great Lakes Cruise Association, and he will be lending to us his expertise this morning. So, Stephen, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning again to all of our guests. I'm broadcasting from Kingston, Ontario. I think I mentioned it earlier, right at the point where Lake Ontario meets the Thousand Islands. I've been a cruise enthusiast all of my life, both on the marine side and on the tourism side, and anything to do with cruising is always an exciting time for me. So I'm looking forward to taking you through some of our destinations in a few minutes. But Joe, I think, would like to say a few words first.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Stephen. As well, we're joined by Susan James. Susan is our travel specialist, and she will give her introduction a bit later on, but she's here joining us as well. She'll be her and Stephen will be able to, in addition to myself, answer any questions that you have throughout this webinar. We do have some time at the end for questions and answers, but definitely throughout the webinar, feel free to, in the Q&A section, write a question, send it in to us, and we'll log it and keep it saved for the end. On your laptop, it's pretty straightforward how to access the Q&A, but if you're on your mobile phone, you probably have to tap the screen in order for that Q&A option to pop up at the bottom, and then you can tap that button, write in your question, send it in to us, and we'll address those at the end. But yeah, like we said, thank you for joining us, and let's dive in. So to start, I wanted to ask you all a poll here, which should be coming up on your screen, about your level of cruise experience. So typically, we have people, we serve guests of all different cruise experiences, from the first cruises ever. Great Lakes is a great place to have your first cruise, definitely an intimate atmosphere, as well as many guests who have traveled extensively in other places in the world, in the Caribbean, in the Mediterranean, and all over. So that question should have popped up on your screen, and we'll give a few more seconds for people to come through, answer, give us that information. Yeah, looks like we have a few people who this will be their first cruise. Great. Some others who have maybe cruised a little bit in the past already, either recently, or maybe it's been a while. Maybe this will be your first cruise since COVID, and others who have maybe cruised a while ago and are getting back into it. So great. Okay, awesome. And then we can head to the next slide, which gives an introduction to, I guess, the difference between cruising on the Great Lakes and cruising anywhere else in the world, where there's much larger bodies of water that the ships navigate. So as you can see at the bottom of the slide, very, very large mega cruise ships where there's, a couple thousand passengers on the Anthem of the Seas, others from, Royal Caribbean cruise lines. Whereas towards the top of the slide, towards the top of the image, you see cruise ships that are more akin to the size of those in the Great Lakes. They hold only 300 to 700, 800 passengers usually, maybe a little bit more as well sometimes, depending on the cruise ship. But these ships are much smaller. They have to fit through the locks all throughout the Great Lakes, which limit the size that they can be. And so when you're on a cruise ship with a much smaller amount of passengers compared with the larger cruise ships, it's definitely a more intimate atmosphere. You get to know the crew better. You get to know your fellow passengers better as you spend a few days navigating the waters with them. And then another point I wanted to touch on just before we dive into the destinations and itineraries in Lakes Ontario and Lake Erie, that we work with all the major cruise lines who operate ships on the Great Lakes. And so we are not beholden to any one specific cruise line. We are here to offer you our own advice based on our experiences on these ships in the Great Lakes, giving you that independent advice suited to your preferences. And so part of as you engage with us, which many of our guests on this webinar, I imagine, already have engaged with us, with Susan. As you engage with us, you give us your preferences. That's mainly our goal, is to help align your preferences, what you're looking to get out of your cruise, with the best itinerary at the best price, and give you that solid support, being very attentive to your needs. That is difficult to get from the cruise lines. So we'll come back to this later on, introduce Susan, and emphasize for you why we're a great partner in choosing the best Great Lakes cruise. But now on to the main presentation. I'll hand it over to you, Stephen, to focus on this area of the Great Lakes region. So if you would like to take it away, go for it.
Thank you again, Joe. What I'd just like to mention before I start is that Great Lakes cruising is intimate ship cruising. Our ships are very small. The largest ship in the Great Lakes has 420 berths. The average size of a cruise ship in the Great Lakes would hold 200 berths, 200 people. And a friend of mine who I had lunch with yesterday had just been on an ocean cruise with a ship that had 5,000 passengers on board, previously 3,000, and before that 2,000. And the average time of getting ashore for a shore excursion, getting off the ship, was 79 minutes. She had timed that each time that she was traveling. On the Great Lakes, the average time is about 12 minutes. So 79 minutes on a massive ocean-going ship and about 12 minutes on a Great Lakes ship, because with a couple of hundred people on board, it's very easy to get ashore within just a few minutes of arriving. So what we're looking at here, of course, is the map of the Great Lakes, and the region we're going to concentrate on would be Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, starting basically a little bit east of Lake Ontario in Quebec City and traveling all the way to Chicago. So if we could just go to a tighter slide than that, Joe. The next slide should show a more expanded version of that. In the center, you can see a little star where I live. This is Kingston, Ontario. But this journey will start on the right-hand side of your screen, a star on Quebec City, traveling through Montreal, Kingston again, where I live, Toronto, where I used to live, Port Coban and Niagara Falls in the Buffalo, Niagara area, and then ending this presentation in Cleveland, and then eventually the ship would carry on and end in Chicago. So taking a look at some of these destinations now, we're starting in Quebec City, and I'm fortunate to be married to a lovely family that originates from Quebec City, so I get to spend quite a bit of time visiting my mother-in-law here. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're looking from the lower town, which is the terrace of stores and homes, all the way to the top of the screen, which is the upper town, and there you have the Chateau Frontenac, magnificent hotel styled in the style of a chateau. So what you have here is an upper and lower town joined by a series of staircases. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see at the very top a funicular railway that takes you from lower town to upper town, takes about 90 seconds, and you're there. Magnificent city to start your journey or to simply visit. We're looking down from one of the bedrooms in that hotel. It's a large hotel with some great elevation down on the Citadel. And the Citadel of Quebec is a fort. And you can see it's a star-shaped fort, which was a defensive design of the era, the colonial era. And this is where the British administration basically garrisoned Quebec City and defended it once they had taken control after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Now it's a magnificent tourist attraction. You can wander into the Citadel next door to the Chateau Frontenac and really enjoy this magnificent view from above, or in fact across the river to the other side. So moving along, we're going to take a quick look at the chateau. Again, I'm connected to Quebec City through my marriage, and many of my brother-in-laws and indeed my father-in-law, when they were students, worked in the chateau as salespeople and serving personnel. My wife was the sales manager here for some time, so we get to wander through each time we visit our family. It is a magnificent hotel and just a wonderful place to stroll through and just stop and maybe just grab a coffee and soak in the atmosphere. Quite a unique hotel, I had to say. So Quebec City has a lower town. We talked about it earlier, and this is what they call the Petit Champlain, the Little Champlain. The street is quite narrow, lots of stores, a few theaters, a couple of interesting monuments, but it's a wonderful place to just wander and do people watching. And they have some rather unique stores, very few franchises, I have to say. Quebec City has done a wonderful job of incubating its economy through individually created enterprises. So the stores you'll be visiting probably will not be magnificent stores that you see around the world. They will be unique to Quebec City and often fairly small. So traveling from Quebec City, you have the opportunity to do a shore excursion to an island nearby called Ile d'Orléans, which is Orleans Island. And this is a small farming community, about 15 minutes drive. No, let's say 20 minutes drive from the center of Quebec. And when this was, first of all, colonized by the French, and Napoleon sent across cuttings from his garden. And there are plum trees at a specific farm on this island which grow plums, and they make jam out of it. So you can actually buy jam from the garden that Napoleon had originally in France. A little bit of a tidbit there, but magnificent place to visit and quite easy drive out of Quebec City. On the way there, if we can look at the next slide, we have Montmorency Falls. So this is a rather unusual waterfall that drains all of the local hinterland down to the level of the St. Lawrence. And what you're looking is, a huge cascade of water. And in the winter, what happens is that it builds what they call a snow cone because it freezes. It's extremely cold here in the winter. And that entire waterfall tends to trickle, but behind it, you can see the snow cone building. Quite a beautiful way of traveling to the Orleans Island. So we're traveling from Quebec City upriver to Montreal. This is a shot that we took in the fall. You can see the beautiful trees, the maples that have turned red, and in the background, the skyline of Montreal. It's quite a classical French city. In fact, the largest French-speaking city outside of France, a huge French-speaking population. It's bilingual. You can get around with English, but if you want a French flavor, Quebec City and Montreal, absolutely a wonderful place to go. The city is very cosmopolitan. You're looking at St. Catherine Street, the main drag, if you like, the main shopping street in this city. This is a beautiful opportunity. Again, not a lot of franchises, some franchise stores, but many stores are totally unique to the province of Quebec and in fact to Montreal. And so if you're looking for something unusual, a little bit different, a little culturally attuned to Quebec, you might want to pop into some of these stores and take a look at what they have. Usually a great atmosphere too. And we're looking at a mural here of Leonard Cohen. This is, in a way, Quebec's favored son. Just looking, yes, this was done by an artist in Quebec, and they decided that when Leonard died a couple of years ago, they would commemorate him. And so his music is famous worldwide, and he's a well-known, he's an iconic performer from the province. You can see one of the rural areas here, out just outside of the city. The Basilica in Quebec City, in Montreal rather, a magnificent building with what they call the St. Joseph's Oratory. There's a light show inside, which is quite spectacular. The building architecturally is absolutely magnificent, featured around the world in architectural magazines for its magnificence, and you can get some idea of the grandeur here. They do offer a tour, and that's certainly one of the highlights of the shore excursion program in Montreal. One of the other things you can do in Montreal is take a 45-minute excursion out to a sugar shack. And of course, this is a famous product in the province of Quebec and in Ontario, I should say, where maple syrup is produced from magnificent maple tree forests and then distilled. And what you see here is maple syrup being poured onto a trough of ice, and it instantly freezes. And I guess what's produced is maple syrup taffy. It's sort of a candy that you can take, but completely fresh and really quite unique tasting. So it's a great shore excursion out of Montreal. We're traveling upriver now to where I live, where I'm broadcasting at the moment. This is a 19th century fort called Fort Henry, and it hails back from the colonial era and the War of 1812. And what you can see here is the beginning of what they call the sunset ceremony. This continues into the early evening, and when darkness descends, and then the orchestra plays the 1812 overture as you see these marchers coming up and down the parade ground here. Magnificent fort. Kingston also is home to the Villa Bellevue, which is where Sir John A. Macdonald, one of our early prime ministers, lived. It's just been restored. It was closed for a wee while, but it's nicely animated with guides in period costume, acting the part of the era. And as you can see, it's just a beautiful villa set in the center of Kingston in a small parkland setting. Kingston is also famous because when the War of 1812 happened, if I could move to the next slide, Joe, the administration, the colonial administration, needed to build a canal from Ottawa to Kingston so that it would be a defensive transportation route hidden away from the St. Lawrence River. And this is the entrance of Kingston Mills Lock from Kingston looking north towards Ottawa. And you can see there are several what we call flights of locks here, moving a boat from Lake Ontario, probably 600 feet into the hinterland and on its journey towards Ottawa, Kingston Mills Lock. And what happened recently in Kingston is that the city bought the last Edwardian cruise ship available. It's called the Keewatin, and it was built 5 years before the Titanic. It's a magnificent piece of maritime history, and here we are literally by hand pulling the ship into the dry dock in Kingston. It arrived, of course, with a tug, but then volunteers by hand pulled that ship into the dry dock and tidied up where it lives today, and it has been beautifully restored. So if you're taking a cruise, you're traveling to Kingston, I can heartily recommend you spend a couple of hours on board the Keewatin, just a beautiful experience. So traveling on, before we travel on, I should say, Kingston has a prison economy, and that sounds a bit onerous, but it goes back to the colonial era and the last part of the century, the part of the last century when Kingston had a number of prisons. And this is Kingston Penitentiary, or Kingston Pen as we call it. There are no prisoners there anymore. They've all gone to more modern prisons, but it's now a well-known movie set. And many of the movies that you'll see featuring a prison of some nature will have been filmed at one point inside Kingston Pen. We're now trying to figure out what to do with this magnificent building. It's too small for one single enterprise, so the city is looking at introducing 5 or 6 different aspects to commercialize the site. So moving on westward along Lake Ontario, we arrive in Ontario, in Toronto rather, my former home. And here we're looking through one of the marinas, a night shot across the skyline of the city to the CN Tower, which you can see has been illuminated, red, white, and blue, I think, looking at the top. Must be a celebration of some kind. So Toronto is a Renaissance city. There are over 90 nationalities in that city, or 90 languages that have been spoken. If I can move to the next slide, please. It's extraordinary. You can see, of course, the CN Tower again, but it's a highly cosmopolitan city, very international, been called a Renaissance city by many people. It's a wonderful city to live in. It has great spirit. It's a city of neighborhoods. And as you'll see from our next slide, it is a city with some curious attractions. I was recently here with my grandson. It's the Toronto Aquarium, and what we're looking at here is a shark tube. It's a tube, an acrylic tube that is pushed through the center of a large shark tank with tiger sharks and nurse sharks swimming around you. It was really impressive, and very impressive for a small 7-year-old boy, I can tell you. Just a wonderful part of Toronto. And again, a shore excursion. All of these excursions in Toronto are within a stone's throw from the port. It's a fairly compact city in that respect. What we're looking at here is a genuine castle. It's called Casa Loma. And it's not a fake castle. It's not an imitation. It is an actual castle that was built quite some time ago as a residence and is now a public entity with functions and different attractions inside. Very interesting place to visit. And opposite the castle, which we're probably not going to see, are the original stables for the horses, which look a little castle-like and really are quite impressive. So that's called Casa Loma, and that's on a shore excursion in Toronto. The other well-known attraction is the AGO, the Art Gallery of Ontario. This is an avant-garde building which joins the original traditional building on the left. You can see the limestone on the right, which is an avant-garde creation by the well-known architect, Canadian architect, Moshe Safdie. It is a beautiful piece of creative thinking. And I have to say, inside the art gallery, it's just a treat. It is one of the finest art galleries or art museums that you'll find anywhere in the world. Beautifully curated and very interesting compositions as you wander through. It's not a boring place at all. It's a place that is a premium shore excursion. And if I can just go to the next slide, one of the great traditions in Toronto, and something I've done with my family many times, is to go down to the Toronto market. Again, it's in the center of the city, a stone's throw from the port where your ship will stop. And one of the great things we've enjoyed is breakfast at the market. We've been there many, many, many times, probably a couple of hundred times over the years, with family and friends and our kids. And but just to wander through the market is just an absolute pleasure. It's very cosmopolitan, very cheerful. There's music playing. You can get a bite to eat, and it's just a neat place to spend an hour or even 2 hours. So we're traveling again westward, and we're going towards Niagara Falls. But in order to get a ship over Niagara Falls to Lake Erie, we have what we call the water staircase. And this is the Welland Canal. As Joe talked earlier, one of the restricting factors in the Great Lakes is the canal system. We have 18 locks between Quebec City and the upper Great Lakes, and the ships have to fit into those locks, and they're fairly small. So that's why we're a small ship destination. And this is the Welland Canal locks. It takes ships from Lake Ontario, 302 feet, up over Niagara Falls into Lake Erie. And the port that we are visiting would be Port Coban, a small town, Canadian town that straddles Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And it is really the attraction of Niagara Falls that has driven the economy in this area. You can see in the distance the Niagara River coming down to the falls and then cascading over. You can take a helicopter ride over the falls. You can use the Maid of the Mist, which is if you look at the right-hand picture, there's a tiny boat in the foreground. That is the Maid of the Mist, and it goes almost up to the point where the falls hit the lower part of the river. Quite spectacular, I have to say, and something I never tire of doing. I've been many times, and I will go again many times. So the other attraction in the Niagara area, if we could move a slide along, is the Niagara on the Lake. This is a turn of the century community, a beautiful little community with virtually no traffic and a lot of horse-drawn carts, no buses. They have to park on the outside of the town. And it is a really lovely place to simply wind down and stroll through the little streets and visit some of the stores, visit some of the monuments. They have a couple of theaters, lots of cafes, and the region is also known for its wineries. So if we can just take a look at one of them here, there are about 30 wineries in the Niagara region, many of them with award-winning wines and uniquely ice wine. So during the winter time, about now, I would say, not really the winter, but approaching now, when there's a frost, the radio stations will broadcast that there has been a hard frost, and they call for volunteers, and many of them turn up at the wineries and help pick the grapes at night whilst they're freezing, and that creates a very concentrated type of a grape juice, which is made into this powerful sweet dessert wine, which we call ice wine. I don't particularly like it, to be honest, but it sells very well, and it sells for a huge tariff and is very, very popular. So we're now looking across the lake. We've transited up the water staircase of the Welland Canal above Niagara Falls, cruised across Lake Erie to Cleveland, and Cleveland also has a market, a little different to the one in Toronto, but absolutely wonderful and a great place to wander through, grab breakfast, grab lunch, grab a bite to eat, just shop in some of the unique little stores. Cleveland's market is, as Toronto's market, just a wonderful place to spend an hour or two. Cleveland also is home to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you don't have to be a rock and roll enthusiast to enjoy this location, because it's really a tribute to music. And rock and roll is certainly part of it, but there is an enormous amount of music being represented by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. performances going on as you travel through, and lots of recordings and wonderful artifacts from famous artists. It's a well worth shore excursion, as is the Cleveland Art Museum, which is one of the finest in the area and certainly the best one on Lake Erie. I've traveled through the museum a number of times. It's in a beautiful setting and really represents the city well. The other unique aspect to this city, if we can just move a slide, is the World War II artifacts, which they have on the shoreline, quite near to where your ship will dock. These are a landing craft from the Normandy landings in the Second World War, and a small frigate, which the American fleet have kindly decommissioned, and Cleveland has taken it to the waterfront as part of their World War II display. For me, one of the most unique parts of Cleveland has to be the Cleveland arcades. These are old English style arcades, which were popular in many English cities at the turn of the century. Cleveland, I think, has 3 of them, beautifully restored. And you can see they're on 3 levels with individual stores. Again, very few franchises here, but individual stores, barbershops, cafes, restaurants, souvenir stores, and some rather unusual antiques on sale. Well worth traveling into the arcades of Cleveland. So, Joe, I'll let you take over and talk about some of our itineraries for a wee moment.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That was a great overview and highlight of the different shore excursions at the various destinations focused on this, eastern region of the Great Lakes. Obviously, we started up in Montreal and Quebec City and came down through Cleveland, as you see here. And we wanted to highlight 2 sample itineraries from different cruise lines that touch upon a few of the different destinations here. So this first one is the 5 Great Lakes plus St. Lawrence Seaway itinerary with Victory Cruise Lines. You see you see that it starts, or there are 2 starting points, one in Montreal, another one in Chicago, and Victory Cruise Lines is one of the only cruise lines that has Chicago as a embarkation port. And we'll see a photo of their cruise ship in the Navy Pier in Chicago in a second. But just to touch on here, although, Lake Superior, this is an all 5 Great Lakes itinerary. Some of them just touch upon Lake Superior, going through the Sault Locks at Sault Ste. Marie, hang out in Lake Superior just at that point for a few hours, and then returns to Lake Huron to continue on in the itinerary. But this is a popular itinerary and goes all the way up through to Montreal. And again, this is with Victory Cruise Lines. Right here, you see a beautiful shot of the Victory 1. They have 2 different cruise ships in the Great Lakes, Victory 1 and Victory 2. And next season, 2025, will be the inaugural season, the return of Victory, these 2 cruise boats on the Great Lakes. And so this is, again, a beautiful shot. You can see the size of this cruise ship and the different decks on this ship. It's beautiful. And here you see the Victory 2 at Navy Pier with the Chicago skyline in the background. It's definitely, again, a popular itinerary because of that embarkation in Chicago, whereas many of the other cruise lines end in Milwaukee instead. But being a point of embarkation in Chicago is definitely an attractive feature of Victory's itineraries. Stephen, I'll turn it back to you to continue discussing a little bit about the ship and the itinerary and the interior.
Sure, Victory, it's a 2-ship fleet. Victory 1 and 2 are twin ships. They were built as turn of the century coastal steamers to look like coastal steamers, but they're not really designed as ocean ships, as you can see with some of the other vessels. They do, of course, travel in the ocean, but they're essentially coastal ships that were perfectly designed for cruising the Great Lakes. If you could move the slide along a little, please. The ship has been totally renovated. They were taken out of service for about a year and refurbished, both in terms of their mechanical competency and also the public rooms, which you can see have been beautifully designed here. And with the addition of a small, intimate private bar area. One of the things that Victory design has are these large picture windows. And we've made a bit of a feature of this because if you can go to one of the cabin images, Joe, you'll see eventually that, here we go, that it just floods light into the into the sleeping room, into the cabin. Some cruise lines do have balconies, and let's talk about that immediately. Victory doesn't need balconies because they have these magnificent large picture windows, which tends to give you a light and airy feeling. And so they've spent a lot of time working out what fabrics to use to reflect the light and to make sure that guests enjoy that kind of an atmosphere in their cabins. We move along the slide, please. The next itinerary. Joe, do you want to just chat about that and I can take over with our next ship?
Yeah, great. So this is an itinerary with Ponant Cruise Lines. It's fall foliage on the St. Lawrence. And as you see, it goes from Lake Ontario, Toronto there, all the way through the Canadian Maritimes and down and through, ending here in Boston in New England. And I mean, I'm looking outside my window now, and this morning was walking around. There's beautiful foliage, just orange and red all over the neighborhood. And I mean, from the photos you see and the experience you would have on this itinerary, it's magnificent to sit on your balcony in the cruise ship and watch from the shoreline the fall foliage pass by. So this is a first image of Ponant Cruise Lines. This is one of their ships, but this is Le Champlain, which is the ship that comes through the fall foliage shot. You can see again the beautiful trees and the beautiful new cruise ship. As Stephen mentioned, this is a cruise ship that's more designed for exploring and has a bit more capability, I think, in open ocean waters, and is just a magnificent, as you'll see from future shots. I'll hand it back over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned is quite correct. These are actually expedition ships. The Victory ships are coastal cruisers and Great Lakes ships, but the Ponant ships were built as an expedition vessel, and they have a fleet of them that look quite similar to this. And the whole idea is to be able to poke their nose into the corners of the earth, wherever they are, and cruise in comfort. They have zodiacs on board. They can launch their inflatables and go exploring. And so this lovely sleek design is very ocean capable and really quite magnificent, I think. You can go to the next slide. The French design is a little bit different to North American, a little more avant-garde in many ways. Being French, of course, you can understand that they have a huge focus on food, and their dining experiences are quite special. Again, being focused from a country that specializes in food, you can imagine what an emphasis Ponant have made on board of their ships. You can go to the next slide. Their design ethic is interesting. The ships all look quite similar in terms of their design, and an amazing amount of curved superstructures on these ships. Wonderful galleries of these magnificent big windows, tremendous vision of the ocean outside. Same goes for the sleeping rooms, the cabins, the staterooms as they're called. Beautiful fabrics, lovely wall coverings, and then these massive picture windows, a bit like Victory in many ways. You know, I think the cruise lines are realizing that the old days when you had a porthole certainly just doesn't cut it anymore. And so they either have balconies or large picture windows, and you can see the same type of approach on Ponant cruises, an intimate bar towards the aft end of the ship, a lot of beautiful curved surfaces. Even the bar is curved and decorated in a very subtle, subdued way. Really, the emphasis is on looking out onto the ocean, not necessarily looking inward towards the ship. The ship has a sauna, and you can see the almost a Finnish approach from as in Finland, with bent wood benches to sit on, beautiful elliptical window, not quite oval, not quite round, a little bit of an elliptical shape, everything towards a design and curvature. Really quite special on the fleet of ships from Ponor. And again, inside the theatre, you can see the use of curved lines and magnificent lighting. It's a real experience traveling on one of the Ponant ships, I have to say. So, Joe, why don't you talk about the number of cruise lines you represent?
Yeah, absolutely. So all the different cruise lines that have ships and itineraries on the Great Lakes, we work with for sure. There's over 160 different sailing dates across all the different cruise lines here in the Great Lakes and the Canadian Maritimes. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we work across all of them, great relationships with all of them, and they make sure to let us know first about the different promotions that they're offering to make sure that we can offer the best prices to our guests. Again, our main goal is to get to know you better, get to know your preferences, what you're looking for, and even if for many exploratory guests who might not have too strong of opinions and preferences on the type of cruise they want in the Great Lakes or specific destinations, we love sharing the different options available to you, whether it's touching all 5 Great Lakes, focusing just on 1 or 2 of the Great Lakes, or seeing a themed or being part of a themed itinerary like the fall foliage in September and October in the Canadian Maritimes. There are other cruises that focus on that there's a partnership with the James Beard Foundation and offering just top level culinary cruises. There's some that have to do with jazz in the sea that focus a bit more on the Boston, New York area. So from the Great Lakes to New England, the Canadian Maritimes, we work across all these different cruise lines and make sure that you have the best cruise experience according to your preferences. So before introducing Susan, she's been waiting patiently this entire time. I just want to mention again that we're after Susan introduces herself, we'll open up for questions and answers, the Q&A session of this webinar. So please feel free to start putting questions in the chat, and we'll have more content to discuss and get those questions answered. But for now, Susan is our travel specialist. I don't think I can introduce you better than you can, but she's been with us for a while, and I imagine many of our guests have already been in touch with her, starting the process, getting the ball rolling in terms of making a booking with us. But Susan, please let us know why you're here with us and how great you are.
Well, thank you for that, Joe.
Yeah.
Yes, hi there. I've been a travel agent for 35 years. Sounds like such a long time. But for the past 3 years, I've been specializing in the Great Lakes. Absolutely amazing destinations and ships. And by asking you some sort of pertinent questions, I can get a pretty good idea of what you're looking for, what you're interested in seeing. Is dining the most important thing to you? I just really enjoy matching the people up with the perfect itinerary for them. That's it.
Thank you, Susan. Wonderful. So yeah, like we've mentioned, we have many guests who Susan is liaisoning with all the time. So you have her contact information there and her phone number there. If you give her a call and she's helping another guest with booking a cruise, for sure she'll get back to you as soon as she can. Or maybe if for whatever reason I might get in touch with you. Or Braden, we have a team of Braden and Rachel and Mark as well, which you'll see on the final slide. But Susan is our head honcho, our main connector with setting you all up with the best Great Lakes cruise. So we will continue through to the Q&A now. And one of the first questions that I see coming across my screen is about the size of the cruise ships. And I guess Stephen, could you give a little bit more color on like how the smaller size and the intimate experience actually or I guess how the smaller size of the ship and of the crew and of the other passengers has a feel on your experience and what that intimate experience is actually like? That's the first question.
I will. Thank you for the question. The average size of our ships in the Great Lakes is they carry 200 guests. The largest ship that we have in the Great Lakes is the Hamburg from Palantos in Germany, and she will carry 420 guests. The Viking ships maximum carry 385 guests. The Victory ships and Pearl Seas cruises carry 190 to 210 guests. So the intimate cruise experience is really what we're offering in the Great Lakes, and it's such an interesting comparison between my friend who's been traveling on ocean ships with, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 if you like passengers. In the Great Lakes, you're not a passenger, you're a guest, because there's only an average couple of hundred of you. And so getting on and off the ship is a breeze. It's easy. Even if you, for example, in Kingston Harbor, where I live, if you were on a ship with a tender, the tender time from the harbor to the shore is only 7 minutes. So getting off the ship, if you're actually tied up at a dock, will take perhaps 12 minutes to get the whole ship off and ashore and onto the shore excursions. And so the value of Great Lakes cruising, one of the values of Great Lakes cruising is the intimacy and the ability to get to know your guests, your fellow guests, and to get to know the crew, because the crew are very accessible. With only 200 guests average to serve, they're going to know your name in about 15 minutes flat, and they will introduce themselves to you. So I think the intimate size of Great Lakes cruising is a significant advantage.
Great. That's helpful to know. And another point there about the size is that, and I guess this is going to be formulated again as a question to you, is that when we talk about shore excursions, you mentioned that you're getting on and off the ship much quicker. But then as well, my experience has been that the shore excursions are a bit more of a, rather than just like a walking tour for offered to a couple hundred people, that the larger ship shore excursions tend to be. They're a bit more premium and intimate of shore excursions, since you're with a smaller group, and you tend to be doing shore excursions with the same people, and so you're spending a lot of time with the fellow passengers. Can you give some reference then to the shore excursions and how intimate those are?
I can. Great Lakes cruising also has another feature which relates to shore excursions in terms of the enrichment program on board. And all of these ships will carry not so much lecturers, but people who give wonderful talks each day about unique aspects of Great Lakes communities, US states, Canadian provinces, the difference between US and Canadian health systems, the political systems, which makes the voyage come alive. It really adds significant value. And so when you talk about shore excursions, Joe, the ability to create unique shore excursions that are quite different, and some of them have taken years to develop, where the planning managers on the cruise ships are working with the managers in our tourism offices in each community to look for something new, to find things that are different, to be able to put an interesting aspect on what could be a mundane experience. And so every shore excursion that you'll take in the Great Lakes has quite a bit of thought behind it and will be very, very meaningful. So I would say they are a really important aspect of this whole Great Lakes cruise experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That's great. That's really good color to add. We have another question on this might be better for Susan. Can you compare for us how all-inclusive of itineraries these are, and how for some, is it true that for some cruise lines there's a lot more included in the price and in the cost of a cruise, whereas for other ones there might be more additional expenses, or it might not be as all-inclusive? Does that make sense, or do I need to rephrase that?
Well, I'll just try and explain the way I've seen it. Most of the cruise lines do include just about everything. I mean, obviously, you've got your cabin, your meals, your drinks, you've got Wi-Fi when you're on board the ship. And in each port that you go to, there is a shore excursion included. The only thing that generally isn't included is air. And every now and then, one of the cruise lines, sometimes Viking, sometimes Pearl, they will have a special. And on certain itineraries, they do have air included. So they really pretty much are all inclusive.
I'd
Great.
just like to add, if I may, to that, Susan is absolutely correct. And one of the great value aspects is the fact that you can travel throughout the Great Lakes and not have to put your hand in your pocket after you
Yeah.
paid your cruise tariff, which is quite remarkable. There are some premium experiences here or there that you would like to buy up to, absolutely. But once you've paid your tariff, these are extremely inclusive experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too about how some cruise lines have will include airfare for certain itineraries. And as we've been helping guests, I've noticed that if I were doing this research on my own, it would it would be very difficult to know, okay, like, this cruise line for this month is offering free airfare, but most of the other ones aren't. And so like one of the advantages again of booking with us is that you get in touch with us and we know, okay, these itineraries, you're getting these extra promotions, these extra airfares included. But it's still, maybe it's still $1,500 more expensive than if you were to do a similar itinerary in the same date with a different cruise line, but maybe you're getting a better service if you really want like the sauna, et cetera. So there's a lot more variables to take into account in terms of both the price, the cost, as well as matching your preferences with your dates, that I've realized if I were trying to book this on my own, you'd be missing out on so many of the different elements that to take into account when booking one of these cruises. So I think that's an important thing to emphasize. There's another question here about whether or not this is going to be repeated. So our plan for these webinars, this is, I think, our third, maybe even our fourth webinar that we've done over the last 2 months. And we plan to continue offering webinars with similar content, but related with, keep mixing it up. So today we focused on Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. We've focused in the past on more in-depth information on the Canadian Maritimes and Prince Edward Island and New England. We're working our way westward across the Great Lakes region and plan to host another webinar in probably 2 weeks, focusing on the rest, on Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and some of the different destinations and sample itineraries for that region, region of the Great Lakes region entirely. So definitely in your emails, you will be invited to the rest of the webinars. But I would also say don't wait to don't wait for those webinars to reach out to us and get that information and those that content, because we're absolutely always happy to pick up the phone or answer your emails with those questions and with that content and give you this more exclusively one-on-one. And additionally, on our YouTube page and on our website, we have the links for these webinars for you to review the recordings of, if you missed some part of it or you want to see some of that content from earlier. So again, you'll receive an email from us and we'll put on our webpage a link to go to our YouTube page where you can see those past webinars that we've run. So another question that just came in, if I have a specific itinerary in mind, are you able to match that up with a particular cruise line? Absolutely. The answer is yes, and we can give you the differences, the small nuanced differences between very similar very similar itineraries across different cruise lines. Whether that's maybe they do one destination in one itinerary, and instead a different destination in a different itinerary, or if there's a particular feature about the cruise line or about the cruise ship itself that would make a notable difference, either in terms of like your stateroom or the culinary, the different restaurants that they have on ship. I don't know if Susan or Stephen, you want to continue adding any other additions to that?
Well, no, I was,
Um,
go ahead.
No, Susan, why don't you comment on that?
I was just going to say, very definitely, if you have a specific itinerary in mind or places that you've always wanted to visit or a certain way that you like to cruise, I can definitely match that up with the perfect option for you, without a doubt.
If I could add one other thing, Joe, it's really important that guests think about what we call pre and post cruise. And the reason I say that is that I bumped into a number of cruisers who have not been able to book 2 or 3 nights before they start cruising in Quebec City, or at the end of their cruise in Chicago, have 2 or 3 nights to enjoy the city. And if you're traveling all that distance, it's not so much safer to get there ahead, but it's the fact that these are wonderful cities and you can take an opportunity to really soak up the atmosphere if you book 2 or 3 nights ahead at the beginning or 2 or 3 nights ahead at the end. So I would urge guests to think really deeply about doing that in order to get the most out of their vacation.
Yeah, that's a great point. We should do at one point, maybe we should do a webinar just on the top pre and post cruise like add-on experiences that you can have. That would be a lot of great content, and that's a great point. There's another question here about the ships being equipped with disability features such as walkers, and is that going to be commonplace across all ships, or is there just some that are more equipped to handle those?
You want to take that, Susan?
Well, I think just about all of the ships do offer accessible cabins. As to whether they provide the equipment or not, that is something that I would have to check. I know that, they do have cabins that are accessible for wheelchairs. They have other cabins that have bars in place, some, very low entrance into the shower, so they can accommodate, again, wheelchairs or walkers, anything like that. But as for supplying the equipment, that I'm not too sure about.
Great. Yeah, another point that you mentioned there is how you get in touch with the cruise lines, and I think it's another important piece to mention that Susan has these direct contacts with the cruise lines for sure, and it's much easier and quicker for her to get that quick answer from those contacts in the cruise lines and get back to you rather than you, our guests, having to get on the phone yourself, wait in line, ask the question. And that's another feature of booking with us. And Susan has much of this knowledge already in her head or on the screen in front of her. And then the final thing, which hasn't been brought up yet, is single supplements. I guess, yeah, Susan, do you want to just briefly speak on that? Because that sometimes is something that a lot of clients have questions about. And yeah, I guess the difference in price and if there's a different experience really with the stateroom sometimes.
Single supplements have always been an issue in cruising. There's no doubt about that. But I'm happy to say there is one cruise line on the Great Lakes, Pearl Seas. They have seen that it was a problem, and they have much more respect, pricing and accommodation wise, for the single travelers. And I've booked many singles on Pearl itineraries and always had amazing feedback. So very definitely it is possible.
Great. Yeah, and a lot of times, or sometimes, we're able to negotiate with the cruise lines and try to bring down that price of a single supplement if that is a barrier for our guests, and it's a lot easier for us to go to the cruise line and make that request on your behalf. And we've done that in the past. So to the extent we can bring down that single supplement price, we definitely will fight to make that happen for you. And yeah, so I think that's mostly it. Our time is just about up. I'd like to just quickly flash, I guess, on the last slide, which is our team. You've met Susan and I today. Braden is also on the line as well in the background, making sure everything goes smoothly. Mark is the founder of Great Lakes Cruises. and sometimes he'll get on the phone or respond to emails as well. So if you see or hear from him, definitely say hello. But yeah, on behalf of everyone at Great Lakes Cruises, thank you so much for spending an hour with us on your Friday morning. And as we mentioned earlier, absolutely always happy to help match your preferences with the best cruise experience here in the Great Lakes.
Take care all.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.